I've been consulting for 3 years as of this year. And I guess it was last fall that I just got to this place. I love running my own business. I love being an entrepreneur. I love consulting. It's really for me and it suits me. But the one downside is I missed having coworkers. Like one of my absolute best friends to this day, I met at Sephora. We sat next to each other and I'm like, I miss having a Christy. I miss just having somebody that you can say.
Shout out to Christy.
Yeah, shout out to Christy.
Welcome back to another episode of Demystifying Cosmetics. In a market where everyone wants to be disruptive, clean, or premium, how do brands say something real and make it stick? In this episode, we are joined by Taylor De Diego, a brand and verbal identity strategist who's helped emerging and established beauty brands clarify not just what they say, but how they say it. With a background in editorial, strategy, and creative direction, Taylor specializes in finding white space, that distinct narrative lane where a brand's voice, values, and audience align come together. Together today, we're going to talk about the difference between having something to say and knowing how to say it, the common traps brands fall into when chasing trends or copying competitors, and how verbal identity is as strategic as it is creative. Taylor will also share some insights from building Beauty Work Friends, which is a collective of independent beauty consultants shaping the next generation of brand building. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
Wonderful. Why don't you give you an introduction to yourself that I didn't capture, and a little bit of how you found yourself in this industry?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm Taylor. I am a brand strategist and copy director, and I've worked in the industry for 13 years, got my start in hair care, eventually moved on and was working for Sephora for 5 years, which really, was kind of the launching point for my career. I learned so much, worked with some of the most talented and creative people in the industry, and then ultimately decided to go freelance and have been doing that for the last 3 years. And as you mentioned so eloquently, working with founders to really help them figure out what their unique selling position is and how they can kind of stand out in an industry that is so incredibly crowded. And doing that foundational work that makes the rest of their brand building just so much easier, understanding what to say, how to say it, and then also, how that trickles into their overarching brand marketing and their creative and their events and their press. It really kind of all stems from their verbal brand identity. And then now also building Beauty Work Friends, which I'm excited to talk to you about. But yeah, that's a nice, I think, succinct summary of what's going on over here.
In a pre-conversation I had with you, and I have actually anecdotally told this story to a number of people since, even though it was just nearly, 4 weeks ago. But you really opened my eyes to a new, I think, definition, or not even definition, but concept of what white space really means. And so I'd love for you to, kind of tell us in your arena, how do you view white space, and how do you help a client to recognize what is their quote unquote white space?
Yeah, I actually loved that early conversation that you and I had where you were like, it feels so cut and dry in my line of work and product, where it's you need something totally net new. I think that in the current state of beauty and working with founders, it really comes down to nuance. Finding something that's ownable to your brand doesn't have to be so black and white, because that's really, really difficult to do in beauty right now. It seems like there's a product for everyone and just lots of options. So when I think of white space, I really think of it as what's your point of differentiation? How can you start to carve out space that is ownable just to what your brand does? And an example that comes to mind, which I think helps kind of clarify this, is I worked with Provence Beauty. They were a long-term client of mine. And when the founder and I first started partnering together, he came to me and he was like, I want to make French beauty cool and accessible to the next generation of beauty and skincare lovers. And it's interesting because what we found in shaping their point of differentiation in their white space is French beauty is not new. It's been, been popular for decades and decades.
It's kind of the birth of beauty and the beauty movement, right? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. But his approach was really novel in saying He's born in Paris, grew up in a family that was making French cosmetics, and he kind of saw the ways in which his parents' generation viewed and consumed French beauty, which was very traditional, kind of like the messy bedhead, perfect skin, red lip that's like a little imperfect. But he was like, this community of French skincare lovers in France and beyond don't just look like that. It's so diverse. There's so many different ways to enjoy French beauty. And so we built his positioning around this idea of modernizing French beauty for the next generation. $25 and under, really amazing actives, still using that kind of blanket French approach of things that are gentle and good for the skin. And I just think that's a great example of there's nuance there. It's not as though he said French beauty is new and we're going to bring this to the market. It's like we have this point of view that it could be even 10 degrees different to really create a lane in beauty that feels like, oh, that's fresh. That's new. I'm excited to see that in the market. And there's so many other examples of that. And I'm sort of two minds that if you truly can't be the first to market to bring something there for the first time, you could be the person that does it better, right? Yeah. So I also think of brands like Refi, which I have so much respect for, both on their product development and the brand that they've created. But I think about Refi and like they're known for kind of this clean, minimalistic beauty look. And I don't think they were the first person or the first brand to do it. I just think they're the best brand to do it. They've done it in a way that's like, it's synonymous with them. It's iconic. It is also so much bigger than product. It's really about the brand world and bringing people into that, building it around their community and their, key audience. So I'm of two minds. If you can't find that super nuanced lane, then go do it better than anybody else is doing it in the market right now.
Sure. And, leaning into that a little bit and, touching upon brands that exist now. And you do see sometimes in, let's say, job descriptions where they're like, oh, we're looking for somebody to kind of refresh, rebrand. And that, like you mentioned, it's not always just about product, right? Like how it looks or performs. And so talk a little bit about that intersection and relationship between this brand Whitespace and its verbal identity and the impact of tone of voice and the selection of the adjectives you use, perhaps.
Oh, yeah. I mean, beauty is so much bigger than product now. Like, I don't think that you can launch a product anymore. And I mean, unless it's truly innovative, right? Like something brand new to market where you're like, oh my gosh, this has never been done before. This ingredient is incredible. We've never seen it. Then I think you can build a brand that way. Otherwise, I think that you're building a lifestyle brand and selling beauty products. So in shaping your verbal brand identity, which a lot of people aren't familiar with that term, I think people are really familiar with visual identity, which is your logo, your font, your color palette, the way that you shoot your photography. Your verbal brand identity is kind of that same roadmap, but just how you talk about your brand and how you get credit for what you do. And all of it stems from that point of differentiation, that area of white space that you've identified. And I always like to say it's sort of like your North Star, right? Once you figure out, okay, well, if we're going to be the brand that's bringing modern French skincare to the market for $25 or under, then that's going to inform everything else that you do, not just your tone of voice and the messages that you write in your copy and your press releases and your weekly emails. It's also going to inform like what events do you throw and then what's the atmosphere and in the environment there. You're probably not going to be playing like Edith Piaf. You might be playing like, modern French pop, and the brand partners that you work with are likely going to be influenced by that also. Maybe it's expats, right, that are living in the US, but were born in France. I mean, I could go on and on about this because I was integrated into the Provence team for so long, but I think, your white space really is your roadmap for so many brand decisions. And I now work with a bunch of brand marketers, or I interact with them via the Beauty Work Friends community, which we'll get into, but they all say the same thing. It's like, you just need to know that clear point of differentiation, your why, your reason to be, and then let that guide everything else that comes. And as that relates to tone of voice, I kind of think about this as a linear path. So first you want to figure out what your positioning is. Who are you? What do you stand for? Who are you for? How do you make them feel seen, heard, understood, welcomed, inspired, etc.? Then you create your brand story, that like client facing message that essentially welcomes them in and says, here's what we do and here's why we're for you. And then your tone of voice comes after that. Kind of synonymous, or I mean, I guess like simultaneous while you're building, but your brand voice has to be, created and built off of what your positioning and your story is. I think that gets confused sometimes where people go straight to, let's start thinking about what those adjectives are, what our vocabulary is, how we sound, what's our persona. But I think that has to come after you've done the real strategic framework up front.
In this, defining their tone of voice, what are some mistakes that you commonly see brands make, whether the ones that you've interacted with or, just being a part of the industry and you just go, oof, miss on that? What are the mistakes that you sometimes see brands make in that tone of voice?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's always just going directly there, right? Like launched a brand and now let's define our tone of voice, where I'm like, oh, there's so much more strategic work that you have to do before you get there. I think of brands like Fenty, Vacation, Topicals. These are brands that have like iconic brand voices. They most certainly did not go from we have a product to now we are defining this brand voice. I'm sure it was always there, but like you have to lay the strategy first. So that one I think is the one that I'm most passionate about, where I'm like, take the time to figure it out first. But then I also think a big error is mimicking your competitors or, looking to other brands and saying like, we love the Vacation tone of voice and we just want to do the same thing.
Sure.
I think it all comes down to authenticity of what you're doing and who you're speaking to. Really understanding who your key audience is going to help guide how you can bring your brand persona and tone of voice to life. So mimicking is never really the answer in branding anyways. You want to create something that feels unique and fresh and ownable. But I see that a lot where I'm like, don't try to be the next Vacation, like really find something that feels ownable and exciting from your own brand point of view.
For, let's say, mimicking or copycat, when you have a brand that maybe uses phrases because, perhaps during the process, right, there's probably an educational portion, which we'll go into next, in terms of, how you're articulating the values that you have, which then, translates into a brand voice or starts to shape it. When there's this commonality of brands that are always like, well, I want to be disruptive, I want to be clean, or I want to be premium, terms that really mean everything and nothing at the same time. How do you approach a brand in a way that does feel authentic and unique, or start to be able to guide them through a process of finding that unique voice?
Yeah, I mean, it's a discovery process. It really is. And I think like anything, bringing in an expert or a handful, right? People rely on strategists and agencies all the time to help them kind of see a different point of view for their brand. I think it's really important, unless you have that person on your team, right? And that's great. But I think that you really have to find that strategic lens in which you dive deep into the brand. Like, I think another kind of common mistake that I see with founders and in-house leads as they're starting brands and they're in kind of that emerging phase is they're just skimming the surface of like, so we have this product and this is our idea. And I'm like, you have to go so much deeper, right? Like really get into the weeds of like, what's your why? What's your motivation? Put yourself into the mindset of, okay, you've probably defined who your key audience is by demographics, where they live, where they shop, other products that they purchase, apps that they use, etc. But I think getting into the psychographics and really understanding like, what's their motivation? Where are they feeling left behind? Where are they feeling like, oh, I want more of this in my life? How can I possibly get that? I think that's where there's really an unlock in understanding how you can build something for them that feels resonant and exciting and fresh. So yeah, I think it's really a discovery process. And I have some tools in which I go through that with founders, but I'm sure there are other people, like me that have different ways of doing it. But it's the deep dive. It's like going under the hood and being willing to like kind of question everything and relook at everything, I would say, before getting into the execution phase.
Yeah. Something I've observed that's agnostic to the industry, it's across, multiple industries, is really when you have a founder, that conviction, right, of the product placement, what the brand stands for, that maybe is only resonant with you or originated only with you and not validated, right? So having that conviction, but also, hiring people around you that also act as an echo chamber, right? So they reiterate the same vision and maybe don't have the perspective that an outsider or a contract individual might. And you mentioned some tools about this discovery process. Can you share with us a little bit about this process and how you start to think about, okay, here is a let's say a brand founder. They've identified, kind of those demographics, but not this psychographics, I think you referred to them as. Lead us through some of the tools maybe you use and a little bit of that overall process.
Yeah, for me, I operate as a team of one when I do this. And so I have like a workbook that I take clients through, and it covers everything, right? Like we go through their brand history. Why did you start it? What was your first product? What was your first testimonial? What are the types of reviews that you're getting now that you want to see more of? And then diving in, like, who are your most engaged clients? Who are you reaching? And who do you want your client to be? Sometimes those things are in disparity. They don't always line up, right? I think we also go into things like, who are your competitors that you see your brand sitting on shelf with eventually? Who are your actual competitors right now that are taking market
your
share?
Aspirational competitors.
Yes, exactly. So this workbook that we go through is quite extensive, right? And really understanding from the founder's point of view, from the client's point of view, and then from the market point of view, like, what can we start to deduce? And I've been doing this for a long time now. And it's so interesting to me that every time I do this with a founder, whether I'm doing it with a brand that's like mid-size and, ready for expansion and looking for additional clarity so that they can put together a pitch deck to take to Sephora or Ulta or whoever, or whether it's an indie brand that's like, I just need to get my start, help me start to figure this out. It always happens. There is an aha moment. There is a moment of click. There is like this moment of, that's what I've been trying to say for the last X years. And I just have never been able to like put my finger on it with this much certainty and clarity. And I think that's the power of really doing the deep dive. It's always there. I never feel like I'm working with a client and I'm like, so this is the idea and here's where we're going from, this point forward. It's usually an unlock of something that they already knew. And what I usually find is that these founders and in-house leads, they have a bunch of ideas of what this brand should be, right? Like, we want to be this to this person, and we should get credit for this aspect of our brand. And then when they do this exercise and we kind of walk through those three areas of like brand, client, market, it starts to bring the picture into focus, being like, okay, so the main thing that we're really seeing when we look at those three levers is this one singular piece of data, information, et cetera, that we can build the brand off of and still get credit for the things that we always thought were exceptional. But when you can deduce down to that singular focus, it makes your life so much easier and everything can build on top of it.
Okay, real quick. Raise your hand if you have dealt with active instability. If you have ever opened a jar of retinol cream and smelt an off odor, or noticed your formula went dark brown, chances are you are dealing with active instability. It's never fun when the formula you've been working on goes south and the due date is only days away. That's why we've encapsulated the trickier ingredients to work with so you can kick the stability struggle to the curb. From retinol to vitamin C, we make it easier to work with those ingredients that typically give you that 3 p.m. headache. The cellulose shell shields the active from outside exposure. Things like air and light that are likely to cause active breakdown, giving you the power to create stable and effective formulas without the trial and error. Ready to quickly create effective skincare formulas? Discover Tagra's Cellucaps line by going to tagra.com/cellucaps. So, have you encapsulated yet? Now back to the show.
I recently spoke with someone who gave a great analogy in thinking about, a house as being the foundation is kind of your brand vision, right? The walls and the interior decoration is a little bit about that, like the brand colors and font and name. But how your customers enter that house is going to be through a very different door, right? It may be the front door, it may be the side door, maybe the back door, which then becomes that language that you use.
Yes.
And so I guess, how do you think about creating the consistency in the tone of voice, but for different customer segments, right? So you probably have ideal customers, and then you have aspirational customers, or ones that you want to potentially reach. How do you see kind of flexing that brand voice while still having saying like, oh, that's Jennifer speaking, right? Because the tenor, or, the cadence, whatever that is. So how do you start to shape those and help brands think about that?
That's a great question, because I think I'm sort of the mind that I'm like, no matter who you're talking to, well, I don't want to say no matter who you're talking to, but no matter where you're speaking to somebody, the voice should be consistent. The message should be consistent. And then I think it's about meeting that client where they are. So I think it comes more down to, I don't even know if I want to say client profiles so much as I want to say, you might have a client who, let's take the example of like a busy working woman or a new mom or something. That language might be tweaked ever so slightly to just like really put your brand through the lens of what they care about, right? Or maybe it's actually coming down to like a Gen Z client, or somebody that's just going to college for the first time. Those are when those psychographics, I think, tell you more and get you farther than a demographic of like, well, 18 to 24-year-old women. Okay, well, 18 to 24-year-old women are very different, right?
Yes.
Put them all into a singular bucket. But if you can put them into life chapters or things that they care deeply about, or maybe something that feels particularly relevant to them. I think in skincare, you can come down to like skin condition. In makeup, it can come down to self-expression and like the type of look that you want to get. So to me, I think your brand voice always has to stay consistent. Your message always has to stay consistent. But when you get into the execution phase, that's where you can really start to reach the right client by resonating with them, by sharing the messages that they need to hear or that they want to hear.
Okay.
And I will say, like, not every brand is for every client. I'm certainly not suggesting that we should talk to the Gen Zer that's off to college and then also the new mom. But those are the circumstances in which, if you can really understand your client on a deep level, it becomes so much easier to reach them with messages that they care about.
It's almost like aligning brand values with an archetype, right? So saying, okay, we have this time-constrained urban professional, right? So the messaging is the same, but we're going to maybe put in like hypothetical bold, or, kind of like envisioning bold being, let's talk about the like how time-saving or efficient this is versus the Gen Z college student, where we're really going to focus more on affordability, right? Like,
absolutely. Yeah. And I think of another client that I've worked with, Soci Beauty. They are such a great brand. And when we worked on their verbal brand identity, we came down when we were understanding kind of like what's their unique positioning in the market. So she was doing so many things really, really well. They were doing clean and sustainable beauty, artistry, and then also this kind of luxury touch. And so for them, what we ultimately got to is this is makeup that is going to help you raise your standards for what makeup can be. Like, yes, you can have a high performing artistry, lipstick, eyeliner, blush, etc., that feels really good to use, like the satisfying click on the components, that's also sustainable and refillable. It was kind of like best of all worlds. And so when we worked on their positioning and got to this idea of, expect more from your makeup, was the tagline that I wrote for them. Yeah. We also had to understand, like, who are these people in the audience that we'll be speaking to? And there really were so many different types. There was the client who's shopping at Credo and cares deeply about clean and sustainable beauty. There's also this artistry client who's wowed by the fact that these products have such attention to detail. And then there's this luxury client that they potentially could go after because their products feel so good in your hand and they look so nice on your vanity. And so to me, that's a great example of the message doesn't change, but how do you speak to those individual clients? And to your point, like, what do you underline in bold when you're talking to the sustainability minded client versus the luxury minded client? Yeah. So message stays the same and then tweaked for the audience at hand.
Going into the Provence example and kind of, the modernization, how do you think about, culture and how that impacts the language and how that may have changed from even just the past 5 years, right? How do you incorporate that into a brand's thinking process where, you might have them in 2017 and they've established this, but due to, rapid geopolitical landscape, there's been a cultural shift that now that messaging isn't as resonant or relevant anymore. What advice would you give to brands to kind of in order to stay relevant
Oh my
with
gosh,
their brand voice?
it's such a great question. And I actually had a conversation with a member of Beauty Work Friends about this yesterday. She's a consumer insights researcher, and her job is literally working with brands to just help them identify, like, here's how the market is shifting. Here's your opportunity. Such a cool job. And one that I was like, we should partner together more often.
Yeah.
I think about this through the lens of, building anything in beauty doesn't exist just in a vacuum in beauty. It's influenced by so many different things. Obviously, the fashion industry is very closely related, but I also think about like the tech sector and like pop culture and just things that are going on in the environment in which your client participates, right? So I think you have to keep eyes on sort of everything. And I mean, that's a tall order for brands, but I think, again, this is where outsourcing, hiring a contractor, working with different partners, identifying that this is a top priority for your brand, and then just making sure that someone on your team is kind of keeping a pulse on what's going on in these kind of adjacent and relevant sectors. I think it's really important. And like I said, it's a tall order, but I think you have to do it. And then in terms of how does that actually shift your brand strategy, I'm hesitant to say that anytime something is happening,
don't be reactive, right?
Yes, don't be reactive. But I think that, the best brand leaders are willing to say, well, this is the right decision for us. We've seen it. We're hearing it from our clients. We understand this is, our lane to play in, to take. And then not being afraid to do it. Like, I don't think you need to rebrand entirely, but it might look like a yearly check-in on your values and your tone of voice and making sure that it still feels like it's mapping back to what you stand for. And so, paying attention to those other sectors and what's going on in the world can certainly have influence on how you build your brand. But I think a pause, a recalibration, and then like a decision whether to move forward or not is kind of the best way to do that.
Yeah. And kind of always thinking about that long-term or 3-year roadmap, keeping in mind that, you don't just start it and then launch it in 3 years, that there needs to be that revalidation on a semi-frequent basis, right?
Yes. Beautifully said. But it's like you also, I think from a brand building perspective, it's not as though you build something and then 6 months later you're like, okay, our verbal brand identity is just proven to be accurate. Like, I think it's a moving and living thing that you have to be willing to kind of pulse check and then go all in on. It's a roadmap. It's really your North Star in figuring out what you're going to go after, what makes sense for your brand. But then I think, being willing to say, well, this is something we're going to relook at and kind of continue to build as our brand grows, as we get more clear on who our audience is, as our audience shifts, all of the different things.
And this is a great segment into the Beauty Work Friends and the power of collaboration. So tell us about Beauty Work Friends and how it started and what role it plays in kind of the work that you're doing today. I know you touched upon a little bit of talking to somebody that, was doing something that was hugely beneficial to what you're doing, but also something new, right, that you've encountered in terms of a professional service. So tell us more about this passion that you've launched.
Yeah, so I've been consulting for 3 years as of this year. And I guess it was last fall that I just got to this place. I love running my own business. I love being an entrepreneur. I love consulting. It's really for me and it suits me. But the one downside is I missed having coworkers. Like one of my absolute best friends to this day, I met at Sephora. We sat next to each other and I'm like, I miss having a Christy. I miss just having somebody that you can say,
shout out to Christy.
Yeah, shout out to Christy. I missed having somebody that it's like, do you want to just go grab a coffee? Or like, did you see the news about Rode being acquired? Or I think now in the consulting world, like I'm running into this thing. Do I need business insurance? Just the questions that come up when you're doing your own thing. So last fall, I was like, maybe I'll just start like a Slack group, and reached out to a handful of people I knew, posted on LinkedIn, and was like, is anybody interested in this? And I got such a great response. So I think we started with 15, 20 people. And slowly over time, I was asking the community, what do you want to see out of Beauty Work Friends? And there was a consensus of more programming, like more opportunities to gather together, more opportunities to meet with industry, leaders and kind of get different points of view. And so we started doing that, just like every month, bringing in a guest speaker, starting to coordinate, like, how can we see each other in person? And then beginning of this year, I was like, this is needed. Like, the people really are finding value in this. I'm finding value in this. Obviously, like I said, it's a bit of a selfish pursuit for me. But then I was really understanding, like, this is so in a time where so many people are going fractional and building their consultancy businesses, and AI is like a big tool that we all lean on. And it feels like, man, I just want to talk to a human. Like, I just want to have that interaction. I think community is more important than ever. So now Beauty Work Friends has grown to 70 people. We're continuing to scale, and it's all fractional experts that have deep expertise in the beauty industry. Like, that's our glue. That's our thing that brings us all together. And it's been incredible to now have at my fingertips this incredible roster of hugely talented senior level individuals who know the beauty industry like the back of their hand. My biggest struggle when I was starting as a consultant was a client would ask me, do you have a creative director that you work with? And I'm like, gosh, I know the best creative director in the whole world, but she works at Sephora. She's not taking side projects. And so now, Beauty Work Friends has become this gold mine of talent where a client asks like, hey, we're starting to think about cultural trends. And I'm like, I have somebody that works in cultural insights and innovation. You can talk to Angie, right? So for me, it feels like such a great opportunity. And, as I've built this, I've really started to think through the lens of, as a consultant, you don't get the same opportunities that you do when you're in-house. Like, let's just say it like blatantly. If you're the in-house, CMO at Glossier, they want you to come speak on a panel. If you're a fractional CMO who's worked with brands like Glow Recipe and whatever, they're not calling you. And so for me, a big goal with Beauty Work Friends is putting these top tier, absolutely incredibly talented consultants on the map, just boosting their visibility and their credibility so that we get more opportunities to be in those rooms, share our expertise, and kind of boost the industry from this different way of working. So it's been a really fun journey, and I feel like we're really just getting started.
Yeah, that's awesome. As a consultant for product development in terms of the formulation side of things, I've been amazed at kind of the inbound inquiries into finding somebody that can be fractional, but can also be supporting the brand, almost being right their go-to because of that, dedicated time, despite being a contract individual. And so it's very interesting also to see raw material suppliers, for instance, seeing value in that, and also even contract manufacturers and saying like, oh, this is an area that, we're very interested in engaging with, and we see it, starting to really play an important role in the industry. And so how do you see the collection of independent experts that you're carefully curating, how they may shape the next generation of beauty brands?
Yeah, I mean, like, listen, the beauty industry is so saturated. That's not new news. Everybody knows that. But like, I think from my perspective, working as a consultant for the last 3 years, it's been hugely advantageous to my clients that they don't have to hire me full time, right? Like these small, mid-sized brands, they don't have the budget to say like, we're going to hire a data analysis. It's just purely dedicated to looking at our data and helping us make better decisions. We don't have the budget to bring on a brand strategist and a copy director to just take this away. Or maybe they do, but that's going to be their one key hire of the year.
Yeah.
So having access to these fractional experts who are, top of the game, who can come in on a fractional basis and have an end to that contract so that they can budget for it, or on a project basis to help them actually achieve, a said goal. It's huge. It's really allowing them to stay in the game. It's very expensive to launch, create, and sustain a beauty brand. And I think when you're in those early days, you can blow through cash really fast, and that runway can quickly be like, where did it go? So hiring these experts on a fractional basis, on a project basis, is just hugely advantageous for making sure you can still achieve your goals without like blowing through cash as fast as like that. So to me, I'm also not the first person to say this, but like fractional work feels like the future. Like it really does feel like it's both fulfilling for the consultant and saying, I can work with, several different brands, get key insights from a whole different perspective, and then offer my skills and my talent in a way that's feasible and accessible. So I think that that's going to be a trend that we continue to see. And like I said, I think it's advantageous. It's mutually beneficial for brand and consultant.
Totally. What resonates with me, I think, is when you talk about that credibility that these fractional leaders have. I have been surprised at the challenges that I have faced despite being in the industry for now over 15 years with approaching products that I've never formulated before, which I don't think I would have had the opportunity if I was in-house somewhere, really dedicated to really producing products that maybe were in line with a certain aesthetic or a certain product profile, which has been very rewarding, and obviously gives me that advantage over somebody who is, in-house and has an expertise, a deep expertise, but perhaps not as broad.
Yep.
And
Totally.
you talked a little bit about, kind of the future, right? And this being a little bit fractional leaders playing definitely a bigger role. I would love to hear, kind of your take also in terms of, which you also mentioned a little bit earlier, how emerging brands can think about this voice, like this verbal voice in a time of AI era where, content is very, it's everywhere, and it's originality and kind of the differentiation between what is authentic versus what is AI generator is difficult to spot.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. So I'll be quite candid about this. I have had a world, a life in copywriting, and I still love doing it. Like I really do. And I think that AI for a minute, I was like, oh my gosh, am I not going to have like the opportunity to do copywriting jobs anymore? Like, is this just going to take over? And I think that for some brands, sure, using AI in that way is feasible, or it might just be the best option for them right now. But I've kind of, I don't know, my tune on this has changed a little bit, especially as like, candidly, I use AI. I use AI in helping build Beauty Work Friends all the time. And I think it's an amazing tool. It is a great tool to have at our fingertips. I won't get into like the dystopian future of like what this could be, but like in the present day of what AI is, I think it's a great tool, and I lean on it, and I encourage clients to lean on it, but with the right perspective. Yeah. So the way that I think about this at being in the place that I am in my career, I see AI for me as like a junior writer. It's something that I'm kind of constantly grooming and giving feedback to. I'm never taking a first draft of what AI provides me. And, for me, it's much more of a tool for kind of like research and initial ideas. But I think that using AI through the lens of like having a toolkit for using AI, I think is the best way to go forward. And I'm very encouraging to my clients where I'm like, once we figure out what your thing is, we can set up what that toolbox is for you to just go and bring to AI so that you can train it from the start really efficiently and effectively so that then it's producing content for you that feels aligned and it feels like an extension of your brand, not just like some kind of like wonky thing. But I will say a few things that I've learned from the Beauty Work Friends community, and these are just kind of some perspectives that have been shared, and I really like this idea, is like AI generated content is going to be mass. Like it's going to be the thing that everybody starts to create. And while I think that there is a blurred line between what's AI created and what's human created, I still think there's some magic behind human created copy and creative and ideas, right? Like we are just inherently more creative than AI is right now. And somebody in the Beauty Work Friends community said it, I think perfectly, that like human created anything is going to be the premium. That's going to be something that you pay more for, because I think it is at the end of the day more distinguishable, right? Yeah. And it is something that feels a bit more memorable, and it's not just out there. It's coming from somebody's brain. It's being channeled. Sure. I think that's the premium. And then I think, AI created content is sort of the mass. idea. Everybody has access to it. It's probably not going to feel super differentiated, but who knows? Like I said, like using AI as a tool and saying like, this is how we want it to perform. This is what we want it to create. It's only going to get better. So I'm of two minds. I really like to believe that there's still going to be a premium on an expert creating something for you. And AI can be a really powerful tool, and we shouldn't shy away from that.
Yeah. I saw an interesting post recently where somebody had a prompt in terms of like post a picture of, and they gave kind of a rough like horses and snakes or a horse with, human legs. And
Yeah.
it really came down to prompt engineering, right?
Mm-hmm.
On what, and so there were dramatic differences in terms of, even though it was a horse with human legs, on how that was interpreted based on the prompts that were engineered by the user. And so I do see that being very much, right? The AI generated content really is dependent on that prompt engineering and ensuring that you're capturing the brand voice to be translated into the messaging and maybe the extended content that you want.
Absolutely. I mean, I think about it in my own world where like I'm lazy sometimes, and I'll be like, I kind of just want AI to read my brain and then be able to like execute this task for me. And it's like that never works, right? Like there's another individual in our community who is a specialist in AI and is like helping brands figure out how to use it most efficiently. And it's been interesting to learn from her that her point of view is basically the same exactly as like what you kind of witnessed, in saying you have to be specific, you have to be clear. And then once you get that idea of, okay, this is who our brand is and we can train AI on it, it's so much more effective. And then you don't have those moments of frustration where you're like, why is it not reading my brain? Like how did you come up with this? Right.
Yeah.
So again, that's where I come back to, it is a tool, and you have to have somebody who's able to give those inputs in a way that feels like, yep, that's correct. Like, yes, that's who we are. Because at the end of the day, it can't read your mind. So you got to prompt it really well.
Well, awesome. This was a great conversation. For our guests out there who want to learn a little bit more about Beauty Work Friends, tell us where we can find Beauty Work Friends and how someone might be able to tap into this network.
Yeah. So beautyworkfriends.com is where you can find all information about our community. It's an application process, since we are kind of, vetting these really incredible individuals in the beauty industry. So if you're a consultant, full-time consultant working in beauty, we'd love to hear from you. Go submit an application. And then something exciting to come. I don't know when this is actually launching, this podcast, but Beauty Work Friends for Brands is launching very soon. And that is actually helping support brands by giving them access to our members and really connecting the dots between consultants and the brands that need them. So that's coming very soon. And that's on the same website, beautyworkfriends.com. So that's where you can find more info. And yeah, really, really excited about what we're getting started and building.
Yeah, that's awesome. Great. Well, great. Thank you for today's conversation.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Jennifer.